My name is Sean, this is Clarence, and today I'm going to be talking about proper heating and lighting for snakes. Snakes are ectothermic, which means they don't produce their own body heat and have to look for external sources to thermoregulate. Heating and lighting for snakes in the wild produce several different health benefits, including aid in digestion. In captivity, we try to closely mimic this so the snake can live a healthy and happy lifestyle. First, let's talk about the different types of heat bulbs. Currently, I mostly use halogens. Halogens do produce visible light. They also produce mostly IRA and IRB, which are the strongest forms of infrared heat. This is a good naturalistic choice, and it's why this is what I mostly use. Similar to halogens, deep heat projectors produce IRA and IRB, but they don't produce any visible light, so this might be a good option for the more nocturnal snakes such as ball pythons. Deep heat projectors can also be used next to a halogen if you're trying to create a bigger basking spot. I'm losing Clarence. Ceramic heat emitters don't produce any visible light, and for my mostly diurnal snakes, I like to use either a ceramic heat emitter or a deep heat projector as a form of a little extra heat that's on for a few hours in the nighttime. A few of my snake species, even though they are mostly diurnal in the wild, can be a little bit more shy. So during the night, for the first 2 or 3 hours, I like to keep a deep heat projector or ceramic heat emitter on in their tank to provide a basking area when they come out and they feel more comfortable in the dark. So let's talk about heat mats. Heat mats, even though they're very common in most of your chain pet stores, they're kind of a last resort for me to use. While I can see heat mats being beneficial to younger snakes that might hide more often and might be at the bottom of an enclosure, heat mats only produce IRC and they can be dangerous. Heat mats should always be used with a thermostat. You'll plug in the heat mat into a thermostat, plug the thermostat into the wall, and then coming off of the thermostat will be a probe. Now the probe is key because if you don't have that directly on the spot where your snake will be warming, the thermostat will think that the heat mat isn't warm enough and it'll just keep running. This can get dangerously hot for your snake, it can harm the animal, and if you have a glass enclosure, this can even break the glass. I had someone recently tell me about how their heat mat got too out of control, the probe was moved, the heat mat stayed on, it cracked the glass on the bottom of the tank and their Mexican black king snake actually got out. So like I said, maybe for a younger snake this might be a good option, but overall I just wouldn't buy any heat mats. Similar to heat mats, but even worse, heat rocks can get really out of control and can be dangerous, and I'm surprised stores even sell these still. Radiant heat panels do not produce any visible light, and they cover a pretty big area, so they can be a good source of heat if you're trying to create a bigger basking spot or a bigger warm side, and they can be very useful and effective for species like a ball python. Now, even though they produce mostly IRC, like I said, they produce a bigger area of warmth, and this might actually help your ball python or your bigger snakes a little more than just a single bulb with a deep heat projector. When it comes to the size of the area that you want to heat, you'll want to make sure there's a good temperature gradient and humidity gradient. To achieve this, usually on my warm side, I like to keep the hot spot or the basking area around 85 to 90 degrees. And then for the rest of the warm side, I keep it around 78 to 85. On the cool side, it's generally room temperature, maybe even as cool as 68 during the nighttime. But throughout the day, it's maybe 74 or 75, depending on the temperature in the house. You want to create a basking spot that's big enough for your snake to completely curl up under and be able to have that heat hitting their whole body. If you have a bigger snake, but you only have one of these domes with one halogen in there, that might not be as effective. That's why I suggest maybe getting a lower wattage of a halogen combined with a lower wattage of a deep heat projector or a ceramic heat emitter to achieve the proper basking area and warm side. Look at him. So for a plant light, obviously you want to cover the area where your plants actually are. I like using these Biodude lights. You can get the fluorescent style lights or an LED. Now while the fixtures with the fluorescent tube are less expensive, I do find them to still be effective. If you buy an LED, you might be paying more, but that light might also be more effective or efficient. When choosing a plant light, you want to get a strip style light rather than these spiral type of bulbs. That spiral obviously just doesn't cover a very big area, and it might not help to keep your plants alive and thriving. I personally have a lot of the solar grows by the BioDude. Arcadia is another company that makes really good plant lights. Arcadia even has some lights that are dimmable, and they start to dim whenever the sun goes down and then go back up whenever the sun rises. Just make sure you get whatever type of light you need for your specific plants so you don't scorch them and it's not too much or too little light. When it comes to mounting a plant light, I keep mine on top of these screen type lids, which can keep as much light from coming through, but as long as your plants are doing fine, then it's all good. If the light's not very effective, you might find some mounting hardware and mount the fixture inside of the enclosure. Just make sure that your snake's not able to touch it because these can get a little warm. I do recommend using UVB with all of your pet snakes. They don't have to have it, but more research is starting to show the snakes might actually benefit from UVB. I mostly use the Arcadia Shade Dwellers for UVB. The Shade Dwellers produce UVB that isn't too strong or too weak for your animal. You'll want to measure the distance and then do the math on the Ferguson zone that your snake is in. Ferguson zones show you a little bit about what the snakes would actually be experiencing in the wild in terms of UVB. For snakes that are hiding more often, the Shade Dwellers work perfect because they wouldn't actually be getting that much UVB during the day. Now, for something like a bearded dragon, maybe, they would want something with a higher output and something that's a little stronger so that combined with the vitamins and minerals that your bearded dragon needs keeps them healthy. Research the Ferguson zone that your snake is in, and then it's a good idea to buy a solar meter. Solar meters, while they can get a little bit expensive, they're worth it if you really want to tune in your UVB. All you have to do is set the solar meter at the bottom of the enclosure where your snake mostly will be underneath it, and it'll give you a reading of how much UVB is hitting that area. You can then match that with what the UVB is supposed to be in your Ferguson zone, and you know if it's in the right place. Similar as with the plant lights, you don't want to buy these spiral bulbs for your UVB. Like I said, it only covers that specific area and it won't be as effective. When it comes to where to place your light and heat in your enclosure, obviously with the plant lights, you want to keep it above the plants somewhere. Depending on the species of plant, you might want to keep it a little farther away so it doesn't scorch the plant. For UVB, I like to keep that pretty close to my heat source. That just creates a similar spectrum to what they would be experiencing in the wild. Like with the plant lights, you can mount UVB inside the enclosure as well. If you decide to mount your heating sources inside the enclosure, make sure you have some type of a bulb cage or some kind of a protective area so your snake can't touch that heat and hurt itself. They do make these cages that go around the bulbs, but sometimes these have holes in them that are big enough for a snake to slip into. Also, if you have a lot of different climbing opportunities for your snake, make sure none of these go right below the heat, because even though you've checked the bottom of the enclosure below the heat source and it's perfect right where you want it, if you have a branch that goes up to that area, that snake can go up that branch obviously and get a lot warmer than what the temperature is below. Another thing to remember is that you want to choose your basking area and where your heat's going to be kind of around your plants and the different things you have in the enclosure. Generally on the cool side of my enclosures, that's where I like to keep some humid moss, possibly a humidity box for my snake to go into whenever it's in shed or about to shed. And I make that side the moist, cool side, and then the more dry, warm side is on the other side. Temperature gradients are important so that the snake has the opportunity to go where it feels most comfortable. Your temperature gradient also affects your plants, your isopods, springtails. A lot of the times on the cooler side, that's where your springtails and your isopods will thrive the most. So if you have moist moss or a humidity box, cork bark, different things to help your cleanup crew thrive, I'd keep that on the cool side. Also regarding the temperature gradient, I usually keep a hide in different areas of the temperature gradient. One on the cool side, one somewhere in the middle, and one on the warm side. Now if you have a smaller enclosure, you need to keep the heat source as far to the side as you can so that there's a more effective heat gradient and the whole enclosure doesn't become just one big basking area. If you had something like a radiant heat panel on a bigger enclosure, that would probably give you a better chance to have a good temperature gradient. So when it comes to wattages, dimmers, and thermostats, figuring out the wattages and how to exactly fine-tune your heat to the temperature you want it at can take quite a bit of patience. Like I said, I try to shoot for 85 to 90 degrees in the basking area, and then about 78 to 85 on the warm side overall. With a 40-gallon enclosure like this one, Usually around a 60 watt to a 75 watt will work perfect. Get this set up before you introduce your animal into the enclosure, and make sure the temperature is consistent and right where you want it before you introduce the animal. I'd recommend that if your halogen or your heat source is a little too warm, buy one of these plug-in dimmers and you can dim it down a little bit to get it exactly where you need it. Just keep in mind this might cause the source of heat to actually be a little bit less effective. You can set up a thermostat and put the probe right underneath the light. You can either tape down the probe or silicone it down. But remember, if you have a halogen, that thermostat's going to be kicking on and off and the light's going to be turning on and off during the day, then your snake might not want to even bask underneath it and it might scare them away. That's why I like to use dimmers and just adjust my temperatures by either dimming the bulb or getting a different wattage of the bulb. For something like a 4x2x2, you might need a 100 watt bulb. Sometimes this can vary depending on the brand, so just make sure you get it where you need to. You might have to buy multiple different bulbs, and it'll take some playing around with. If you're using a thermostat, just remember that when the temperature gets a few degrees below what you have it set at on the thermostat, this will kick the heat source back on, and then once it hits that desired temperature, it'll kick it back off. This could also wear down your bulbs a little more. Now with a ceramic heat emitter or a deep heat projector, this wouldn't be as much of a problem because there's no visible light. But if that probe isn't secure and there's some way for that snake to move it, the temperature of that basking spot could get well over 100 degrees. For timers, I like to use these Bluetooth or Wi-Fi compatible timers. You can get a 2-pack of these for maybe around $20 at Walmart or Amazon. And while in my experience these do have the tendency to stop working after a year or two, some of them I've had for about 5 years. A lot of these timers come with an app, and you can adjust what time your heating and lighting turns on and off if you're away from your home. You'll want to make sure the total combined rating of those fixtures doesn't go over the surge protector's power rating. So for your checklist, probably the #1 thing I would recommend investing in is a temperature gun. You need to make sure you have some kind of a heat source, which could be some kind of a heat bulb. If you need a bigger basking area, it might be multiple heat bulbs, possibly a radiant heat panel, and hopefully not, but possibly a heat mat. For your heat bulbs, you'll need to get a dome. You'll need some plant lights if you do have plants in your enclosure. And then I also recommend UVB, even though it's not exactly required. Basking rocks. Make sure you never get the plug-in type of basking rock. I like to just go to Home Depot, Lowe's, or somewhere like that and get some kind of slate rocks. You can get a bunch of these flat rocks and create a basking surface for your snake. I highly recommend getting dome locks or some kind of spring-loaded locks that you can put over your light or heat fixtures so they can't get moved around very easily, especially if you have cats. Surge protectors, timers, possibly thermostats, a solar meter, dimmers, extra bulbs, possibly a protector over the bulb. You might also want to get these chains that connect together the different fixtures. Also remember that depending on how you set up your enclosure, if you have one side that's built up a little farther than the other, you'll have to adjust your temperatures if you make changes inside the enclosure. I highly recommend researching the specific snake that you're going to be using the heating and lighting on, because this can vary. For a ball python, for example, where they're from in Africa, they actually stay buried a lot of the time in a moist, warm hole under the ground. Ball pythons like warm, humid environments, and they're usually mostly nocturnal. Regardless of which species you have, you want to make sure you have a good day-night cycle, so no visible light on during the night, and then some visible light during the day. Now if you decide to use deep heat projectors or ceramic heat emitters or a radiant heat panel, you can use these during the day, but make sure you have some kind of visible ambient light coming in through the windows so that your snake has a good day-night cycle. A lot of places still sell these blue or red bulbs, and people like to use them at night because they think they look cool, which they kind of do. But this can disrupt your snake's patterns and behaviors and their health overall. So I usually keep all light off during the night, actually always. I usually have a deep heat projector on the ball pythons throughout the night and then a halogen during the day. Just remember, if you do multiple bulbs, you'll have to have lower wattages than you would with that one bulb that you had before, or you'll have to dim both of them. One other random thing that I noticed in the past, if you have enclosures pretty close to each other and you're using a mini dome, if that dome is too close to the bottom of the enclosure above it, it might get that enclosure above it too warm. The snake above that one buries down, the bottom of the enclosure will be too hot and could harm it. There also are some brackets available that attach to the outside of your enclosure, and these are adjustable, so you can hook your dome up to that bracket and then raise it farther above or closer to your enclosure to adjust the heat. The heat on your enclosure can also affect the humidity, so just keep that in mind and make adjustments to whatever the humidity needs to be for your specific species. All right, so that's my pet snake lighting and heating guide. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Please like this video and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.